Don't come to the reunion, Dad texted me 5 minutes before I was set to leave my apartment. Maria's boyfriend is a state senator, and we need to impress him. Your job as a secretary and that cheap car of yours will only embarrass us. I stared at the phone and took a sip of my vintage wine. I typed back a single word. Okay. What my father Otis didn't know was that I wasn't coming as his daughter. I was coming as the owner of the venue. And the senator he was trying so hard to impress was actually the man I was currently investigating for federal fraud. When I walked through those doors tonight, the music would stop and the screaming would begin. Before I tell you how I destroyed my family's reputation in one evening, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind your family exactly who you are. I stood in the center of my penthouse overlooking the Potomac River, the city lights of DC, glittering below like scattered diamonds. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass showed a woman who looked nothing like the failure my family described. I smoothed the fabric of my black custom Givenchy dress. To the untrained eye, it was simple, almost plain. It lacked the flashy logos and bright colors my mother Beatrice usually insisted upon for church events. But anyone who knew true wealth would recognize the hand-stitching and the way the silk moved like water. This was my armor. My phone buzzed on the Marble Island countertop, shattering the quiet elegance of the room. I didn't need to look to know who it was, but I picked it up anyway. The name Otis Williams flashed on the screen. My father. The message was long and blistering. Jasmine, do not come tonight. Senator Thorne is a man of class and high standing. He does not need to see his girlfriend's sister looking like she just came from a shift at a temp agency. Stay in your apartment. We told everyone you are working late filing papers. Do not ruin Chantel's big moment. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Filing papers. That was what they thought I did. For 10 years, I had let them believe I was a struggling administrative assistant living paycheck to paycheck in the capital. It was easier than explaining that I was a crisis management consultant for the most powerful firms in the country. I didn't file papers. I made problems disappear. And tonight, Senator Bradley Thorne was the problem. I walked over to my safe and pulled out a watch. It was a Patek Philippe encrusted with diamonds, a gift from a Saudi client after I saved his oil conglomerate from a PR disaster. I fastened it around my wrist, the cold metal grounding me. My father wanted me to stay away because I wasn't good enough to sit at the same table as a senator. The irony was rich. By the end of the night, he would be begging me to save him from that very same table. I picked up my phone and typed a reply, my fingers moving with precision. Understood. I will not sit at your table as your daughter. I hit send, dropped the phone into my clutch, and walked toward the private elevator. The game was on. The air inside the back of the Maybach was cool and smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. I sat back against the plush seat, my iPad resting on my knees. The windows were tinted so dark that the world outside was just a blur of shadows, but I liked it that way. In my line of work, visibility was a liability. Being invisible was power. On the screen of my tablet was the dossier of Senator Bradley Thorne. His face smiled back at me, a perfect practice smile that had won him 2 elections and apparently my sister's heart. But I wasn't looking at his smile. I was looking at the forensic accounting report highlighted in red. Embezzlement, kickbacks from construction contracts, and a direct link to a shell company that had donated $50,000 to my father's church renovation fund. My father thought he was climbing the social ladder by marrying Chantel off to this man. He didn't realize he was tethering himself to a sinking ship. As the car glided smoothly through the traffic toward the country club, a memory forced its way to the surface. It was vivid and painful, sharp as a knife. I was 16 years old, standing in the pouring rain outside my high school. My shoes were soaked through and my heavy backpack was digging into my shoulders. A brand new white convertible had pulled up to the curb. My parents were in the front seats, beaming. Chantel, who had just turned 16, was in the driver's seat, squealing with delight. They had bought her a car for her birthday, a car we supposedly couldn't afford, I remembered knocking on the window, the rain plastering my hair to my face. "Can I get a ride home?" I had asked, shivering. My father hadn't even rolled the window down all the way. "There isn't room, Jasmine," he had said through the crack. "We have balloons in the back seat for Chantel's surprise party. Takes the bus. It builds character." They had driven off, leaving me in the exhaust fumes, watching the balloons bobbing in the back seat where I should have been. That walk to the bus stop had taken 20 minutes. I had pneumonia for 2 weeks after that. They never apologized. They just told me I should have brought an umbrella. Now, 15 years later, I looked around the interior of a car that cost more than their entire house. "It builds character, Dad," I whispered to the empty air. "You were right about one thing. It certainly built something." The car slowed as we approached the wrought iron gates of the country club. I could see the line of vehicles ahead, mostly mid-range luxury sedans and leased BMWs. The security guard was stopping each one, checking names on a clipboard, shining a flashlight into the faces of the drivers. When my driver pulled up, the guard stepped forward, his face set in a stern expression, ready to interrogate. Then his eyes dropped to the license plate. Diplomatic tags. Government clearance. He froze. His posture shifted instantly from aggression to deference. He didn't ask for a name. He didn't ask for an invitation. He simply stepped back, pressed the button to open the gate wide, and saluted. My driver nodded once and accelerated up the winding driveway past the perfectly manicured lawns. Up ahead, the lights of the clubhouse blazed against the night sky. I could see figures moving on the terrace, dressed in their finest rented tuxedos and sequined gowns. They were playing at being elite. I closed the file on my iPad and took a deep breath. My heart rate didn't elevate. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't the girl in the rain anymore. I was the storm. And I was about to make landfall. As I stepped onto the plush red carpet of the country club lobby, my father did not greet me with a warm hug or a welcoming smile. Instead, his hand shot out like a viper, clamping down hard on my upper arm. His grip was tight, painful enough to bruise, but hidden perfectly by the angle of his body. To the photographers flashing their bulbs near the entrance, and the wealthy donors mingling by the coat check, it probably looked like a father guiding his wayward daughter. But I knew better. I looked into the eyes of Pastor Otis Williams, the man who preached about love and forgiveness every Sunday morning to a congregation of thousands, and I saw nothing but cold calculation and simmering rage. He dragged me toward a secluded alcove behind a large potted palm, away from the prying eyes of the guests he was so desperate to impress. His breath smelled of peppermint and expensive scotch, a combination that always made my stomach turn. I tried to pull my arm away, but he dug his fingers in deeper, his perfectly manicured nails pressing into my skin through the fabric of my dress. "You have exactly 5 seconds to turn around and get back in that car, Jasmine," he hissed, his voice a low rumble that only I could hear. "Do not make a scene. This night is not about you. It is never about you. Tonight is about your sister and the man who is going to elevate this entire family. Senator Thorne is our ticket. He is the key to the new community center, the federal grants, and the political influence I have been working toward for 30 years. I will not let your cheap secretary's salary and your minimum wage attitude ruin it." I stared at him, my expression unmoving. The old Jasmine, the girl who cried when he missed her high school graduation because he had a golf tournament with the mayor, would have crumbled. She would have begged for a chance to stay to prove she could behave. She would have apologized for existing. But that girl died in the rain 10 years ago. I was not that girl anymore. I was the woman who cleaned up messes for people far more powerful than Otis Williams. "I am not leaving, Dad," I said calmly, my voice cutting through his bluster like a razor. "I have every right to be here." His face turned a shade of purple I remembered well. The veins in his neck bulged against his starch-white collar. "You listen to me, you ungrateful child. If you take one step toward that ballroom, if you open your mouth and say anything embarrassing to the senator or his guests, I swear on the Bible I will cut you off for good. You will be dead to me. You will never set foot in my house again, and I will make sure the entire congregation knows what a disappointment you are." A silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Around us, the chatter of the elite continued, uninterrupted laughter and clinking glasses echoing off the marble walls. I looked down at his hand gripping my silk sleeve, then up at his eyes. I didn't pull away this time. I simply reached up and peeled his fingers off my arm one by one. He was so shocked by the action, by the sheer strength and audacity of it, that he let go. I smoothed out the fabric of my dress, taking my time dusting off the invisible specks of his hypocrisy. "You seem to have forgotten something, Pastor," I said, my voice ice cold. "You already cut me off. You disowned me 10 years ago when I refused to go to your seminary school and chose my own path. You cannot kill something that is already dead." I stepped around him, leaving him standing there with his mouth slightly open, his threats hanging uselessly in the air. I walked straight toward the VIP check-in desk, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, a countdown to his destruction. I kept walking toward the heavy oak doors of the ballroom, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the marble floor. Behind me, I heard the frantic scuffling of dress shoes. My father was running. For a man who prided himself on dignity and composure, Pastor Otis Williams was unraveling fast. He was breathless, not from the physical exertion, but from the sheer panic of losing control over a narrative he had spent decades constructing. "Officer," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings and drawing the attention of every guest in the lobby. "Remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing. She has no invitation, and she is harassing my family." I stopped and turned slowly, pivoting on my heel to face them. My mother, Beatrice, had caught up to him, clutching his arm for support. She was panting, her chest heaving beneath her sequined gown, her eyes darting around the room to see who was watching. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and disgust. "Get her out of here," she hissed at the security team, her voice a venomous whisper. "Before the senator sees her, she does not belong here. Look at her dress. It is plain. It is cheap. She is just a secretary." The head of security stepped forward from his post near the velvet ropes. He was a massive man with broad shoulders that strained against his black suit jacket. His name tag read Marcus. My father puffed out his chest, mistaking the guard's approach for compliance. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "Do you hear me?" he demanded, his voice rising with false authority. "I am Pastor Otis Williams, and I am a personal guest of Senator Thorne. I demand you escort this person off the premises. She is disturbingly obsessed with our family and clearly mentally unstable. She is ruining a private event." I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, holding the small gold card that served as my ticket. I did not say a word. I did not defend myself. I simply looked at Marcus. I knew Marcus. I had hired his private security firm to handle 3 high-risk political fundraisers in the last year alone. He knew exactly who signed the checks. Marcus stopped 2 feet in front of me. He did not look at my father. He did not look at my mother. He looked directly at me, and then he did something that made the blood drain from my father's face. He bowed. It was a sharp, respectful inclination of his head, the kind of gesture reserved for royalty or the people who own the building. "Good evening, Ms. Williams," Marcus said, his deep voice cutting through my parents' babble like a knife through silk. "We have been expecting you. The event organizers asked me to alert them the moment you arrived." My father let out a strangled sound like a dying engine. "What? You must be mistaken. You are confused. I just told you she is a trespasser. She is a nobody. She cannot possibly be expected." Marcus turned his head slowly, fixing my father with a glare that could freeze water. "Sir, please lower your voice. You are disturbing our guest of honor." He turned back to me, his demeanor softening instantly. "Ms. Williams, you are the sole diamond sponsor for this evening. The private suite has been prepared for your pre-dinner cocktails if you wish, or I can escort you directly to the head table. The chairman is eager to thank you personally for your donation." The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. My mother's hand flew to her throat, clutching her fake pearls as if she were choking. My father stood with his mouth agape, his eyes bulging as if his brain was trying to reject the information it had just received. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was actually a trap door. "Diamond sponsor," he whispered the words coming out as a wheeze. "That is impossible. That is $50,000. 75, actually." I corrected him smoothly, my voice calm and clear in the quiet lobby. I wanted to make sure the champagne was vintage. "I know how much you hate cheap wine, Dad." I stepped past them, my shoulder brushing against my father's arm. He did not move. He was frozen in a state of cognitive dissonance, unable to reconcile the daughter he thought was a failure with the woman who had just bought the entire party. "Shall we, Marcus?" I asked, not looking back. "Right this way, ma'am," the guard replied, stepping aside to unhook the velvet rope. I walked into the ballroom, leaving my parents standing in the lobby, looking as if they had been struck by lightning. They were not just stunned, they were terrified. They were beginning to realize that they were not the ones in charge tonight. I stepped through the mahogany doors, and the air changed instantly. The lobby had been cold marble and echoes, but the ballroom was a suffocating blanket of warmth, scent, and noise. Thousands of crystals shimmered above in 3 massive chandeliers, casting a golden glow over the room that was meant to flatter aging skin and cheap jewelry. A live jazz band was playing in the corner, a smooth saxophone melody that floated over the din of clinking silverware and polite laughter. It was the smell that hit me first, a heavy, cloying mix of expensive Lily's roast beef and the desperate ambition of social climbers. I moved through the crowd, my posture rigid, my expression unreadable. I felt the eyes on me before I heard the voices. In a community this tight, in a church circle, this gossip-fueled nothing went unnoticed. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the choir director, leaning over her plate of salad to whisper to Deacon Miller. Her eyes widened behind her thick glasses as she recognized me. "Is not that Jasmine?" she hissed loud enough for 3 tables to hear. "Otis' daughter, the one who ran off to live in sin." I kept walking, my gaze fixed on the far wall, but my ears caught every word. "I heard she was stripping in Atlanta," someone murmured. "No, I heard she was in jail for fraud," another voice corrected. "Look at her now, walking in here like she owns the place. Where did she get that dress? Probably stole it. The prodigal daughter returns." Deacon Miller sneered, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "I wonder if Otis knows she is here. He must be mortified." Behind me, I could hear the frantic footsteps of my parents trying to catch up, trying to get ahead of the rumors spreading like wildfire through the room. I could imagine my mother's tight smile as she leaned in to correct people, to tell them I was just a wayward child. She was praying for a burden she bore with Christian grace. They were painting a picture of me as a failure, a charity case they had graciously allowed back into the fold. But I did not stop to correct them. I did not stop to greet anyone. I let the whispers wash over me like water off a duck's back. Let them talk. Let them speculate. In 10 minutes, none of their petty gossip would matter. A man in a tuxedo appeared in front of me holding a seating chart bound in leather. He looked at me, then down at his list, then back at me with wide eyes. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice hushed with reverence. "We are honored you could make it. Please write this way." He turned and began to carve a path through the center of the room. We walked past the tables near the door where the lower-tier donors sat. We walked past the middle section where the local business owners and church elders held court. We kept walking toward the raised platform at the very front of the room. The whispers grew louder, shifting from judgment to confusion. Why was the usher leading the family disappointment past the empty seats? Why was he taking her to the front? We stopped at the only table on the riser. It was draped in black velvet set with gold-rimmed plates and crystal goblets that caught the light. There were 6 chairs. The center chair, the seat of honor, had a placard in front of it. Senator Bradley Thorne. The usher pulled out the chair directly to the right of the senator's seat. "Your seat, Ms. Williams," he said, gesturing with a white-gloved hand. I sat down, smoothing my dress beneath me. I picked up the linen napkin and placed it on my lap. I looked out over the sea of faces, the hundreds of people staring at me in stunned silence. I saw Mrs. Higgins drop her fork. I saw Deacon Miller choke on his water. And standing at the edge of the dance floor, I saw my parents and Chantel staring up at me, their faces pale masks of absolute horror. I picked up my wine glass and raised it slightly in their direction, a silent toast to the chaos that was about to begin. My parents scrambled up the steps of the riser, their faces flushed with a mix of physical exertion and social panic. They looked like actors who had missed their cue and were frantically trying to find their marks on stage before the spotlight hit. Otis Williams adjusted his silk tie, puffing out his chest as he approached the table. In his mind, he was still the patriarch, the shepherd of the flock, the man who commanded respect by simply walking into a room. He ignored me completely, his eyes fixed on the empty high-backed chair at the head of the table, the throne that commanded the best view of the ballroom. It was the seat of power, the seat of the host, and naturally he assumed it belonged to him. He reached for the chair back, his gold pinky ring catching the light. "I will sit here," he announced to the hovering waitstaff, his voice booming slightly to ensure the nearby tables heard him. "My wife will sit to my right, and the senator will obviously sit to my left. You may remove the extra setting for the uninvited guest." He gestured vaguely in my direction as if I were a piece of lint on a tuxedo. He did not even look at me. He just expected me to vanish because he had willed it. A young waiter in a crisp white jacket stepped forward smoothly, intercepting my father's hand before it could touch the velvet upholstery. I recognized him. He was part of the team I had tipped generously during the setup earlier that afternoon. "I beg your pardon, sir?" The waiter said, his voice polite, but unyielding as a stone wall. "That seat is reserved for the event chairperson." My father blinked, his smile faltering. "Yes, exactly. I am Pastor Williams. I am the spiritual advisor to the senator and the guest of honor." The waiter did not move. He did not check a list. He simply shook his head. "The diamond sponsor and chairperson for this evening is Ms. Jasmine Williams, sir. This is her seat." He gestured to where I sat, sipping my wine. The silence that fell over my family was absolute. It was not just silence, it was a vacuum, a void where their reality used to exist. Otis looked from the waiter to the chair, then to me. His brain seemed to be misfiring, unable to process the data. Jasmine was the failure. Jasmine was the secretary. Jasmine could not be the chairperson. My mother Beatrice let out a sound like a tire losing air. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white under her layers of foundation. She leaned in close to my father, her voice a hiss of pure venom that was loud enough for the waiter and me to hear, but low enough to avoid the microphones. "She slept with someone?" Beatrice whispered, her eyes narrowing into slits as she looked at me with undisguised loathing. "That is the only explanation, Otis. She must be sleeping with one of the organizers, or maybe the owner of the club. Look at her, sitting there like a harlot. She probably bartered her way into that seat on her back." I swirled the dark red liquid in my glass, watching the legs of the wine drip down the crystal. I did not flinch. I did not defend myself. I did not offer them the satisfaction of seeing their insults land. 10 years ago, that comment would have sent me running to the bathroom in tears. Today, it just bored me. It was so predictable, so small. The waiter cleared his throat, his expression tightening with distaste at my mother's words. He gestured to the chairs further down the table, away from the center, away from the power. "Your seats are down there, folks," he said, his tone losing its professional warmth. "Seats 4, 5, and 6. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin." Otis looked around the room. He saw the eyes of his deacons, the stares of the wealthy donors. He realized that making a scene now would only deepen the humiliation. He had lost the high ground. With a stiff jerk of his head, he signaled Beatrice and Chantel. They shuffled past me, their expensive gowns rustling like dry leaves. They had to walk past my chair to get to their assigned spots. I did not move my legs. I forced them to navigate around me, to squeeze through the narrow space between my chair and the edge of the platform. They were relegated to the sidelines, the supporting cast in a play they thought they were starring in. I sat alone in the center, the queen on the board, flanked by empty chairs, waiting for the king to arrive so I could checkmate him. I took another sip of wine. It tasted like victory. The appetizers arrived on silver trays, carried by a phalanx of waiters who moved with military precision. They placed the plates down simultaneously, a choreography of service that cost more than my parents' annual tithes. On the porcelain sat a single seared scallop topped with a dollop of caviar and a shaving of black truffle. It was elegant, refined, and completely wasted on the people sitting to my left. Beatrice poked at the scallop with her fork, as if it were a dead insect. She leaned toward me, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper she used when she wanted to destroy someone without making a scene in church. "Do not think this changes anything, Jasmine," she hissed. "You can buy a seat. You can buy a dress. But you cannot buy class. You are still the same girl who ran away from Bible college in the middle of the night because she could not handle the coursework." I picked up my wine glass, the crystal cool against my fingertips. I did not look at her. I looked at the light refracting through the Chardonnay. That was their favorite story, the legend of Jasmine the dropout. 10 years ago, I had left their stifling religious college, not because I was failing, but because I had been accepted into a specialized program for forensic accounting and crisis management in Zurich. I had left a note explaining everything. They had burned it, and told the congregation I had a nervous breakdown. "You broke your mother's heart," Otis added, leaning past Beatrice to glare at me. His eyes were hard beads of judgment. "We had such high hopes for you. We prayed you would find your way back to the path. Instead, you ran off to live in sin and poverty. Do the organizers know you never even got a degree? Do they know they are honoring a dropout?" I took a small bite of the scallop. The flavor was perfect, briny, and rich. I chewed slowly, forcing them to wait, forcing them to sit in their own bile. "I have degrees, Father," I said, calmly swallowing. "Plural. And I did not run away." I ascended. Chantal let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She was applying a fresh coat of lip gloss, checking her reflection in her butter knife. "Please," she scoffed. "You probably bought those online just like you bought this seat. You are pathetic, Jasmine. You think sitting here makes you one of us. It does not. You are just a placeholder. When Bradley gets here, he is going to laugh you out of the chair. He hates fakes." The irony was so thick I could almost taste it metallic and sharp on my tongue. Bradley Thorne, the man who had faked his military service record, the man who had faked his charitable foundation, hated fakes. It was almost poetic. "Just try not to embarrass us when he arrives," Beatrice muttered, smoothing her napkin. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not try to flirt with him. He is a senator. He is way out of your league." I set my fork down gently on the edge of the plate. "You are right, Mother," I said, turning to look her full in the face. "He is not in my league. He is my employee." Before she could process that, before Otis could launch into another sermon about humility, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The spotlight swung toward the double doors at the back of the room. The jazz band swelled into a patriotic fanfare. A voice boomed over the loudspeakers, deep and resonant, silencing the room instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and welcome our guest of honor. The voice of the people, the future of our state, Senator Bradley Thorne." The doors flew open. The room erupted in applause. And my family turned toward the light smiles plastered on their faces, oblivious to the shadow sitting right next to them. The double doors swung open with theatrical flair, revealing Senator Bradley Thorne in all his manufactured glory. He stood framed in the doorway for a beat too long, letting the applause wash over him like a warm bath. He looked exactly like his campaign posters, jawline sharp enough to cut glass hair coiffed into submission, and a smile that cost more than my father's annual salary. He wore a white dinner jacket, a bold choice that screamed confidence and separated him visually from every other man in the room. He looked like a savior, descending from on high, ready to bless the masses with his presence. Chantal did not wait for him to approach. She practically leaped from her seat, abandoning her parents without a backward glance. She rushed down the steps of the riser, her chiffon dress trailing behind her like a frantic cloud. She threw herself at his arm, latching on with a desperation that was painful to watch. She pressed her body against his, staking her claim physically. She beamed at the crowd, her eyes scanning the room to make sure every jealous cousin and judgmental aunt saw exactly who she was touching. She was not just Chantel Williams anymore. She was the senator's girlfriend. She was proximity to power. Bradley patted her hand absent-mindedly, the way one might pet an eager golden retriever while looking for the owner. His eyes were not on her. They were scanning the room, dissecting the crowd. I knew that look. I had seen it on 100 corrupt CEOs and politicians before him. He was counting heads. He was calculating net worth. He was estimating how much money he could extract from this room before the night was over. He spotted Otis standing by his chair, chest puffed out, and flashed a thumbs up. My father melted. He actually bowed slightly, a display of subservience that made bile rise in my throat. Bradley's gaze continued to sweep the room, moving over the faces of the choir members, the small business owners, the people he planned to evict from their homes to build his luxury condos. He smiled at them, a wolf smiling at a flock of sheep. He did not look at the head table yet. The stage lights were bright, creating a glare that obscured the details of the riser. He saw the empty chair at the center, the throne reserved for him. He saw the flowers. He saw the glint of crystal. But he did not see the figure sitting quietly in the shadows to the right of his seat. He began to move through the crowd, dragging Chantal along like a piece of luggage. He shook hands without making eye contact. He laughed at jokes he did not hear. He was moving with purpose, heading straight for the high ground, straight for the seat of honor, straight toward me. I set my wine glass down on the tablecloth without making a sound. I uncrossed my legs and planted my feet firmly on the floor. I adjusted the cuffs of my dress. He was 10 feet away. 5 feet. He was climbing the stairs now, his eyes fixed on the empty chair, his smile fixed in place like a mask. He was walking into the lion's den, and he thought he was the lion. Bradley reached the top of the riser, and my father lunged forward like a starving man reaching for bread. Otis grabbed the senator's hand, pumping it vigorously, his face split in a grin that showed too many teeth. "Welcome, Senator Thorne," he boomed, ensuring the microphones picked up his proximity to power. "We are so honored." Bradley's smile was on autopilot. He nodded and gripped Otis's hand, but his eyes were already moving past my father. He was looking for his seat. He was looking for his throne. And that was when he saw me. I was sitting perfectly still, the stem of my wine glass resting lightly between my fingers. I was not smiling. I was staring directly into his eyes with the cold, clinical detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. The effect was instantaneous. It was like watching a machine short-circuit. Bradley froze mid-handshake. His jaw went slack. The politician's mask, the charming veneer he wore like a second skin, evaporated in a fraction of a second, leaving behind something raw and terrified. His pupils dilated so wide his eyes looked black. A bead of sweat popped out on his hairline and trickled down his temple, cutting through his expensive foundation. He stopped breathing. I could see the air trapped in his chest. He did not know me as Jasmine Williams, the secretary. He did not know me as the failure of the family. To him, I was Jane Doe. I was the ghost in the machine. I was the forensic accountant who had been brought in 6 months ago by his biggest donor to audit a suspicious offshore account. I was the woman who had sat across from him in a dark room in Georgetown and listed the dates and times of every bribe he had ever taken. I was the one person in Washington, D.C., who held the keys to his prison cell. Otis sensed the shift. He looked from Bradley to me, confusion clouding his face. "Senator, are you all right?" Bradley did not answer. He pulled his hand away from my father as if he had been burned. His knees actually buckled slightly and he had to grab the back of his chair to steady himself. He looked like he had seen the devil himself sitting at his dinner table. Chantal was oblivious. She was still clinging to his arm, beaming at the crowd. "Honey, sit down," she chirped, tugging on his sleeve. "You must be exhausted." He did not move. He could not move. He was trapped in the headlights of his own destruction. The blood had drained from his face so completely he looked like wax. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. I decided to put him out of his misery. I lifted my crystal glass, catching the light of the chandelier. I tilted it toward him, a gesture of mock salute. "Hello, Senator," I said, my voice smooth and carrying effortlessly over the silence of the head table. "It truly is a small world, isn't it?" The reaction was violent and immediate. Bradley jerked his arm back as if Chantal were made of burning coal. My sister, who had been leaning her entire body weight against him, stumbled in her 6-inch heels. Her ankle twisted with a sickening crack, and she grabbed the edge of the tablecloth to keep from hitting the floor. A glass of water tipped over, soaking the white linen, but no one noticed. All eyes were on the senator. He did not even glance at the woman he was supposed to marry. He scrambled past her, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. He practically vaulted over the gap between the stairs and my chair, ignoring the layout of the table entirely. He looked like a man running from a burning building. My father Otis misinterpreted the movement completely. In his desperate mind, he saw a powerful man rushing to confront a disrespectful intruder. He thought Bradley was attacking me for my insolence. Otis stepped forward, puffing his chest out, trying to play the mediator while simultaneously throwing me under the bus. "Senator, please forgive her," Otis stammered, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "My daughter is not well. She has struggled with mental health issues for years. She often has delusions of grandeur. Please do not let her presence upset you. I will have security remove her immediately. She does not speak for this family. She is the black sheep. We tried to keep her away for your sake." Bradley did not even hear him. He shoved past my father with enough force to send Otis stumbling back into Beatrice. The pastor looked shocked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water as the man he idolized treated him like an obstacle on a sidewalk. Bradley reached my side of the table. He did not yell. He did not call security. He did not demand I leave. Instead, he did the impossible. The state senator, the man who walked into rooms like he owned the oxygen, collapsed at the waist. He bent forward until his forehead was almost touching the table, his hands gripping the back of the empty chair next to me for support. He was shaking so hard the silverware rattled against the china. "Ms. Williams," he choked out, his voice a ragged whisper that carried across the silent head table. "I swear to you, I did not know. I had no idea this was your family. If I had known these people were connected to you, I never would have set foot in this building. Please believe me, I did not know." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Chantal had pulled herself upright, her mascara smudged, clutching her ankle. Beatrice was holding Otis upright, both of them staring at the senator with expressions of absolute incomprehension. They were waiting for the punchline. They were waiting for him to straighten up and laugh and tell them it was a joke. But Bradley stayed bent over, panting like a dog waiting for a command. I watched him for a long moment, letting the terror marinate. I took another slow sip of my wine, enjoying the way the light caught the deep red liquid. I set the glass down with a deliberate click. "Sit down, Bradley," I said, my voice low and bored. "You are making a scene, and you are ruining my parents' big night. We would not want to disappoint the pastor, would we? Now put your napkin in your lap and try not to look like you are about to vomit. We have a long dinner ahead of us." Bradley sank into his chair with the grace of a man walking to the gallows. His knees hit the table leg, causing the water glasses to tremble, but he did not seem to notice. He reached for his fork, his hand shaking so violently that the silver utensil slipped through his sweat-slicked fingers and clattered loudly against his china plate. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the tense silence of the head table. A waiter rushed forward to replace it, but Bradley waved him away, his eyes darting nervously toward me as if asking for permission to breathe. He did not eat. The filet mignon sat untouched on his plate, glistening under the chandelier lights. He looked nauseous. His face was a mask of sheer terror, the kind usually reserved for people who wake up to find a gun pointed at their temple. My parents, however, were oblivious to the nuances of fear. They saw his distress as an opportunity to comfort him, to ingratiate themselves further into his world. They interpreted his silence as contemplation, his shaking as fatigue. They launched into their rehearsed routine a tag-team performance of sycophancy that was painful to witness. "Senator, you must be exhausted from the campaign trail," my mother Beatrice cooed, leaning across the table. She ignored me completely, acting as if the seat to her right was empty. "Chantal has been telling us how hard you work. She is so supportive, you know. Just the other day she was saying how much she looks forward to managing your schedule. She has such a mind for organization. She will make a perfect political wife, don't you think?" My father Otis chimed in, his voice booming with forced joviality. "Absolutely, Beatrice. Behind every great man is a greater woman, as the good book implies. Chantal is a woman of virtue, Senator. She has led the youth choir for 3 years. She understands the burden of leadership. She is ready to stand beside you when you announce your run for governor." They paused, waiting for validation, waiting for him to agree and compliment their golden child. But Bradley did not hear a word they said. He was not looking at Chantal. He was not looking at Otis. His eyes were glued to the object resting casually next to my wine glass. My phone. It was face up the screen, black and silent. But Bradley knew what was inside. He knew that with one tap, one biometric scan, I could access the encrypted cloud server that held the evidence of his wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. He knew I could forward the audio recordings of him soliciting bribes to the Department of Justice before dessert was served. He stared at that phone like it was a bomb ticking down to 0. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. I reached out slowly, my movements deliberate, and tapped the screen. It lit up, displaying the time. Bradley flinched, his whole body jerking back as if I had reached for a weapon. Chantal slammed her hand down on the table, startling everyone. She had been watching Bradley watch me, and her face was twisted into a mask of ugly, jealous rage. She did not see a man terrified for his freedom. She saw a man ignoring her for the sister she despised. "What is wrong with you, Bradley?" She snapped, her voice shrill and cutting. "Stop staring at her. Why are you so fascinated by my sister? She is just a secretary. She files papers for a living. She is nobody. Look at me when I'm talking to you." The vibration of my phone against the mahogany table was a subtle hum, but in the charged silence that followed Chantal's outburst, it sounded like an earthquake. I did not look at my sister, who was still trembling with jealous rage. I looked at Bradley. His eyes were locked on the screen where the caller ID read, "Only Asset Recovery Unit." He knew what that meant. In our world, that was the Reaper calling. I picked up the device. I did not bring it to my ear. Instead, I tapped the speaker icon and set it gently back down on the white linen tablecloth right next to the senator's salad fork. I adjusted the volume so it was low, intimate enough that only our end of the table could hear. It was a private execution. "Go ahead," I said, my voice soft but perfectly audible. The voice that floated out of the speaker was digital, crisp, and terrifyingly efficient. It was the voice of a man who spent his life hunting down money that did not want to be found. A forensic accountant who could find a penny in a haystack. "Ms. Williams, we have a match. The shell company in the Cayman Islands is just a pass-through. We traced the wire transfers. They bounce through 3 banks in Cyprus, but they all terminate in the same place." I watched Bradley. He had just lifted his wine glass to his lips, his hand trembling so badly the liquid inside was creating small tidal waves. He froze, the rim of the glass resting against his bottom lip. "Where?" I asked, simply leaning back in my chair. "Zurich," the voice replied. "Credit Suisse. Account number ending in 842. The balance is $15 million, all unwashed. The source codes link back to the construction contracts for the low-income housing project. Do you want us to freeze it or flag it for the IRS? Bradley inhaled sharply. The wine he had been trying to sip went down the wrong pipe. He erupted into a violent fit of coughing, spraying a fine mist of expensive Cabernet over his white dinner jacket. He slammed the glass down, wine sloshing over the sides and staining the tablecloth like blood. He grabbed his napkin, hacking into the linen as if he were trying to expel his own lungs. His face turned a deep, alarming shade of crimson, his eyes bulging. Otis looked from the coughing senator to my phone, his expression one of utter bewilderment. He had no context. He had no idea what unwashed money meant, or why a Swiss bank account would cause a man to nearly choke to death. To him, this was just his rude daughter taking a business call during a formal dinner. Jasmine turned that off immediately. My father snapped, his voice low and angry. Have you no manners? The senator is choking, and you are conducting business at the table. Hang up this instant. You are embarrassing us. I ignored him. I kept my eyes pinned on Bradley, who was wiping his mouth with a shaking hand, his eyes watering. He looked at the phone as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table ready to strike. He was not coughing because of the wine. He was coughing because his life was flashing before his eyes. Hold off on the IRS, I said to the speakerphone, my eyes never leaving Bradley's face. Let us see how the rest of the evening goes. I might want to hand-deliver this file to the FBI myself. Stand by. I tapped the red icon ending the call. The silence that returned to the table was heavier than before. It was thick with the scent of panic and impending doom. Bradley lowered the napkin. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the absolute certainty of his demise. He knew that account number. He knew exactly where that money came from, and he knew that if the IRS saw it, he would die in federal prison. I smiled, a small, cold curving of my lips that had no warmth in it. Did you hear that clearly, Senator? I asked, my voice conversational. Or was the signal bad? I can have him call back and read the transaction history if you like. Perhaps my father would be interested to hear where the donations for his new church wing actually went. Bradley dabbed at the wine stains on his white jacket with a trembling hand, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth as if praying it would swallow him whole. My father, however, had not yet grasped the gravity of the situation. He saw a man choking on wine, not a man choking on his own crimes. Otis straightened his spine, adjusting his tie with the indignation of a man who believes his own press releases. He looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and fury, the same look he used to give me when I wore pants to Sunday service. Jasmine, that is enough, Otis boomed, his voice projected to reach the back of the room. You have disrupted this meal, you have insulted our guest, and you have conducted business at the table. You have no respect for the sanctity of this gathering. I demand you apologize to the senator immediately and then leave. I turned my head slowly to look at him. It was the first time I had truly looked him in the eye since I sat down. I did not see a father. I saw a man in a cheap suit trying to sell salvation while picking pockets. Respect is earned, Dad, I said, my voice conversational, almost pleasant. Speaking of earnings, how is the Sanctuary of Grace Charity Fund doing? I heard donations were up 30% this quarter. That is a lot of money for a housing project that has not laid a single brick in 2 years. Otis froze. The bluster drained out of him, instantly replaced by a sudden sickly pallor. His mouth opened but no sound came out. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. And congratulations on the new purchase, by the way. A 50-foot Sunseeker yacht is quite an upgrade for a humble servant of God. What did you name her? The Divine Providence. It is docked at the marina in Annapolis right now, isn't it? Slip 42. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Jasmine, how dare you? That boat was a gift. The congregation wanted your father to have a place to meditate and pray. I laughed, a short, sharp sound. A gift, Mother. Is that what we are calling it? Because my records show a direct transfer of $200,000 from the charity account to a private LLC registered in your name just 3 days before the purchase. That is not a gift. That is embezzlement. And in the eyes of the IRS, it is also tax fraud. Otis gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He looked terrified, not because he was caught, but because he was caught in front of the senator. He turned his head slowly toward Bradley, looking for an ally, looking for the powerful man who had promised to protect him. But he found no sympathy in Bradley Thorne's eyes. The senator had stopped shaking. He was staring at Otis with a look of absolute revulsion. It was not the disgust of a moral man looking at a sinner. It was the disgust of a professional criminal looking at an amateur. Bradley knew the game. He knew how to hide money, how to layer shell companies, how to keep his hands clean. He realized in that moment that Otis was sloppy. Otis was a liability. "You use the charity account?" Bradley asked, his voice quiet and dangerous. "You bought a boat directly from the fund." Otis stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. "It was a loan, Senator. A temporary loan. I intended to pay it back." Bradley laughed a humorless sound. "You idiot! You complete amateur! You are going to bring us all down." The air at the table grew heavy and toxic. The alliance was fracturing. The facade of the respectable religious family was crumbling brick by brick, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the salad. It needed more dressing. Chantel could not stand the silence. She could not stand the way the power had shifted at the table, the way her fiancé was cowering and her father was sweating. She needed to reassert her dominance, to remind everyone why we were really here. She was the bride-to-be. She was the future Mrs. Senator. She was the winner. She cleared her throat, a loud theatrical sound, and thrust her left hand into the center of the table, right under my nose. The overhead chandelier caught the stone on her ring finger, making it sparkle aggressively. It was huge, a cushion cut, that looked to be at least 4 carats, surrounded by a halo of smaller stones. "Since we are talking about investments," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "take a look at this." Bradley did not spare any expense. He told me he went to Tiffany's personally to pick it out. He said only the best for his future First Lady. "It is flawless, Jasmine, just like our future. I bet you have never even seen a diamond this big, let alone worn one." I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my hand. I did not look at Chantel. I looked at the ring. I looked at the way it refracted light. A real diamond bends light sharply, breaking it into gray and white with flashes of fire. This stone was throwing rainbows everywhere, disco ball sparkles of blue and orange that screamed synthetic to anyone who knew what they were looking at. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Bradley," I said, my voice soft but cutting, "you are laundering $15 million through Swiss banks, but you could not spare more than $150 for your fiancé's ring. That is just mean." Chantel yanked her hand back as if I had bitten her. "Excuse me," she snapped. "This is a diamond. It cost $40,000. "It is Moissanité Chantel," I corrected her calmly, "and not even the good kind. That is a mass-produced stone, probably ordered from a factory in Guangzhou. I saw the exact same setting on a wholesale website last week. Retail price $149 plus shipping." Chantel let out a shriek of laughter that sounded bordering on hysterical. "You are so jealous," she screamed, her face twisting. "You cannot stand that he chose me. You cannot stand that he loves me enough to buy me this. You are lying. You are just a bitter, lonely secretary who buys her own jewelry because no man wants her. Tell her, Bradley. Tell her where you bought it." She turned to him, her eyes wide and desperate, waiting for him to crush me with the receipt, waiting for him to defend his honor and her worth. "Bradley, tell her." Chantel repeated, her voice wobbling slightly. Bradley did not speak. He did not look at her. He stared at his plate, his shoulders hunched as if he were trying to make himself disappear. He was a man who had committed federal crimes. He wasn't going to perjure himself over a piece of costume jewelry. He knew I knew. And he knew that if he lied, I would probably pull up the credit card statement to prove it. The silence stretched out, agonizing and revealing. Chantel looked at him, then at me, then back at him. Her hand dropped slowly to the table, the heavy stone clacking against the wood. The sparkle suddenly looked cheap. The rainbows looked like mockery. For the first time all night, the delusion cracked. She looked at the man she was selling her soul for, and she realized he hadn't even paid full price. The silence around the ring was just the appetizer I was ready to serve the main course. I watched Chantel pull her hand back into her lap, covering the fake diamond with her other hand. She looked small suddenly. The bravado that usually armored her was cracking, revealing the insecure girl underneath who just wanted to be chosen. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity for her, but then I remembered the smirk on her face when she told me I was nothing. Pity evaporated, replaced by the cold resolve of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. I turned my gaze back to the senator. He was sweating profusely now, the moisture beading on his forehead and soaking into the collar of his dress shirt. He looked like a rat trapped in a maze, realizing every turn led to a dead end. He took a sip of water, but his hand shook so badly the ice cubes clinked against the glass, like wind chimes in a storm. "Bradley," I said, my voice soft but carrying the weight of a gavel. "Since we are clearing the air, let us talk about the wedding. Or rather, let us call it what it really is, the merger." Otis bristled, his paternal instinct finally warring with his political ambition. "Jasmine, do not speak about their union that way. It is a holy covenant. It is blessed by God." "Is it, Father?" I asked, not looking away from Bradley. "Or is it a business transaction?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with the senator. "Tell me, Bradley, do you love my sister? Do you look at her and see the love of your life, the mother of your future children? Or do you look at her and see 50,000 registered voters sitting in the pews of the Sanctuary of Grace? Do you see a wife? Or do you see a demographic you are polling badly with?" The question hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Chantel looked up, her eyes wide and wet, pleading with him to deny it. She wanted him to slam his fist on the table and declare his undying love. She wanted the fairy tale defense. She wanted him to say she was the only woman in the world. Bradley opened his mouth. His eyes darted to Otis, then to Chantel, then terrified to me. He knew I had the emails. He knew I had the strategy memos from his campaign manager explicitly outlining the Williams strategy to secure the urban vote through a high-profile alliance. He knew I had the audio recording of him calling Chantel a useful prop during a donor dinner in Georgetown. If he lied, I would quote his own words back to him and destroy him instantly. If he told the truth, he would lose the church support he desperately needed for re-election, and Otis would likely strangle him. He was checkmated. He stammered. His Adam's apple bobbed convulsively. "Well, Chantel is a wonderful woman. She has great qualities. We share values." "It is complex, Jasmine. Relationships are complex. You cannot boil it down to just one word." He was drowning. He could not say the word love. He physically could not force it past his lips while I was watching him. Otis leaned forward, his face darkening, the realization slowly dawning on him. "Senator, that is a simple question. Do you love my daughter or not?" Bradley looked at Otis, his eyes pleading for understanding, pleading for the older man to recognize the political game they were both playing. He wanted Otis to be a co-conspirator, to wink and nod and accept the power instead of the emotion. But Otis needed the fantasy. Bradley looked back at me. He saw the phone sitting on the table. He saw the file in my eyes. He closed his mouth and looked down at his lap, defeated. The silence stretched out for 10 seconds. 20. It was louder than any scream. Chantel let out a small broken sob, covering her mouth with her hand. I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the liquid. "I think we have our answer," I said coldly, my voice finalizing the verdict. "In politics and in love, Bradley's silence is consent." I reached down into my clutch purse, my fingers brushing against the cold leather. I pulled out a thick cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, weighted down by high-resolution, glossy proof of betrayal. I did not hand it to Bradley. He was already broken. I slid it across the white tablecloth toward Chantel. It hissed softly against the linen, stopping right next to her hand, which was still resting near the fake diamond ring. "What is this?" Chantel whispered, her voice trembling. She looked at the envelope as if it contained anthrax. "Consider it an early wedding gift," I said, my tone flat and matter-of-fact. "Or perhaps consider it a severance package. Go ahead. Open it. You deserve to know exactly who you are standing next to at the altar." Bradley made a noise in the back of his throat, a strangled protest. "Jasmine, don't," he begged, his eyes wide with panic. "Please, not this." But it was too late. Chantel's curiosity mixed with her growing horror compelled her. Her manicured fingers fumbled with the seal, tearing the expensive paper. She upended the envelope, and a stack of photographs spilled out onto the table, fanning out like a winning hand of poker. The images were crisp, taken with a telephoto lens by a private investigator who charged $500 an hour. They showed a yacht, not just any yacht, but a sleek white vessel anchored off the coast of Miami. The sun was shining, the water was blue, and Senator Bradley Thorne was very clearly enjoying himself. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing swim trunks, holding a bottle of champagne, and he was not alone. Flanking him on either side were two women who looked nothing like Chantel. They were young, tanned, and wearing very little. In one photo, Bradley's hand was resting possessively on the blonde woman's thigh. In another, he was kissing the brunette's neck while she laughed. I watched Chantel's face as she processed the images. I watched the color drain away, leaving her skin gray and ash-like. "Last Tuesday," I said, cutting through the silence. That was the date. "Do you remember last Tuesday, Chantel? Bradley told you he had an emergency session in Congress. He said he had to stay in D.C. to vote on the infrastructure bill. He told you he was working late for the people." Chantel picked up one of the photos, her hand shaking so violently the paper rattled. She stared at it, her eyes tracing the lines of her fiancé's smile, the relaxed slope of his shoulders. He looked happy, happier than he had ever looked with her. "He told me his phone died." She whispered the words, barely audible. "He said the battery died and he couldn't find a charger. That is why he didn't call me goodnight." "He did not call you because he was busy," I said brutally. "He was busy spending campaign funds on escorts and Cristal. Look at the timestamp on the bottom right corner, 9:45 p.m. While you were texting him prayers for his stressful night, he was pouring drinks for girls who charge by the hour." Bradley put his head in his hands, unable to look at her. He did not deny it. There was no point. The evidence was right there, lying between the silverware and the water glasses. Chantel dropped the photo. It fluttered down to the table, landing face up on top of the others. A single tear escaped her eye, tracking through her heavy foundation and dripping off her chin. Then another, and another. Her shoulders began to heave, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The illusion was not just cracked anymore. It was shattered into a million jagged pieces, and she was bleeding out right in front of us. She looked at the man she worshipped and finally saw the monster underneath the suit. I watched my sister, expecting the explosion. I expected her to stand up, to throw the fake ring in his face, to demand the respect she had never received from our parents. The whole table held its breath. Otis looked like he was praying not to God, but to the poles. Beatrice was clutching her napkin so hard it might tear. Bradley was still staring at his lap, waiting for the guillotine to drop. Then Chantel sniffed. It was a loud, wet sound. She reached for her napkin and dabbed her eyes carefully, avoiding her mascara. She sat up straighter, adjusting the strap of her dress. She reached out and gathered the glossy images of her fiancé's infidelity into a neat stack. She tapped them on the table to align the edges and shoved them back into the cream-colored envelope. Then she tossed it aside like it was nothing more than junk mail. "So what?" she said, her voice steady and terrifyingly calm. "He is a politician, Jasmine. He is a powerful man in his prime. Powerful men have appetites. It is the cost of doing business. You think Kennedy was faithful. You think King was a saint at home. This is the real world, not one of your fairy tales." She turned to Bradley and placed her hand over his trembling fist. She squeezed it hard enough to turn her knuckles white. "Baby, look at me," she commanded. Bradley looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. "I do not care what you do on your boat," Chantel said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I do not care who you sleep with when you are in D.C. I do not care about the escorts or the money or the lies. As long as you come home to the mansion. As long as I am the one standing next to you at the inauguration. As long as the press calls me Mrs. Thorne. I am going to be a senator's wife, Bradley. That is the deal. That is the only thing that matters. So wipe your face, put your smile back on. We have donors to impress. I felt the air leave my lungs. I had come here thinking my sister was a pawn. I thought she was a foolish girl being used by a predator. I was wrong. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. She was willing to sell her dignity, her self-respect, and her soul for a title and a proximity to power. She was exactly like Otis. She was exactly like Beatrice. The rot did not just touch the roots of this family tree. It had infected every single branch. They deserved each other. I looked at Otis. He let out a long sigh of relief, his shoulders sagging. He was proud of her. He was actually proud that she had accepted her humiliation to preserve his ambition. He nodded at her approvingly, a silent benediction for her sacrifice. That was the moment the last shred of hesitation left my body. There was nothing here worth saving, no innocence left to protect, no misunderstanding to clear up. They were all monsters feeding on the same carcass of prestige. I turned to the waiter, who was hovering nervously with a pitcher of water, his eyes wide with second-hand embarrassment. "Take that water away," I said, my voice flat and hard. "Bring me the whiskey. The whole bottle. Leave the glass. It is going to be a very long night." The waiter placed the bottle of aged whiskey on the table, and the amber liquid swirled into my glass, catching the light like liquid fire. I took a sip, letting the burn settle the cold rage in my stomach. The silence at the head table was no longer awkward, it was terrified. Chantel was staring at her lap, picking at the tablecloth. Bradley was staring at the air, seeing his political career disintegrate. And my parents were staring at me, trying to calculate how much damage control they needed to do to save face. That was when a shadow fell across the table. I looked up to see a man standing there, a man whose presence usually commanded a room just as much as the senators. It was State Attorney General David Ross. He was a man known for his ruthlessness in court, a man who had put 3 mayors behind bars in the last decade. Otis had been trying to get a meeting with him for 5 years, sending letter after letter begging for an audience to discuss faith-based initiatives. Ross had never replied. Now here he was standing at our table. But he was not looking at Otis. He was not looking at the senator. He was looking at me. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice warm and filled with genuine respect. "I thought that was you. I did not want to interrupt your dinner, but I had to come over and personally thank you." Otis scrambled to his feet, adjusting his jacket, his face lighting up with a desperate hope. "General Ross," he said, extending his hand. "What an honor. I am Pastor Otis Williams, and this is my daughter Jasmine. I believe there has been some confusion." Ross ignored my father's hand completely. He kept his eyes locked on mine. "The petrochemical merger yesterday," Ross continued as if my father had not spoken. "The governor was incredibly impressed with how you handled the union negotiations. You saved thousands of jobs, Jasmine. The White House sent a commendation this morning. Brilliant work. Truly brilliant." I nodded slightly, acknowledging the praise. "Thank you, David. It was a mess, but we cleaned it up." Otis looked between us, his head swiveling like a spectator at a tennis match. Confusion warped his features. Merger. White House. Commendation. None of these words fit the narrative he had built around my existence. "Excuse me." General Otis interrupted, his voice trembling slightly. "You must be mistaken. Jasmine is an administrative assistant. She is a secretary at a law firm in D.C. She files papers." Ross looked at my father, then back at me. He threw his head back and laughed, a deep, booming sound that drew eyes from the surrounding tables. "A secretary. He chuckled, wiping a tear from his eye. That is a good one, Pastor. You have a wonderful sense of humor. A secretary. He leaned in close, his hands resting on the back of my chair, his demeanor shifting from amused to serious. Sir, your daughter is the senior crisis advisor to the White House. She is the highest paid independent consultant in Washington. When the Department of Justice hits a wall, they call her. When the president has a problem that cannot be solved on the record, he calls her. She is not a secretary. She is the person who tells the secretaries what to write. Ross gave my shoulder a respectful squeeze. Good to see you, Jasmine. Senator. He nodded curtly at Bradley, who flinched at the recognition and walked away. Otis fell back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. His face went from confused to gray. Sweat beaded instantly on his forehead, glistening under the chandelier lights. He looked at me, his eyes wide and terrified. He looked at the daughter he had ridiculed, the daughter he had tried to ban from the building, and for the first time he did not see a disappointment. He saw a titan, and he realized with a jolt of pure icy fear that he had been throwing rocks at a tank. General Ross walked away into the crowd, leaving a vacuum of silence at our table that felt heavy enough to crush lungs. The air conditioning was humming, but Otis was sweating as if he were standing in a furnace. He dabbed his forehead with a linen napkin, his eyes darting around the room, terrified that another high-ranking government official might appear to expose him. Bradley was slumped in his chair, looking less like a senator and more like a man waiting for the executioner to test the rope. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the whiskey, letting the burn coat my throat. It was time to pivot. We had established my power. Now we needed to establish their crimes. Since we are discussing community service and commendations, I said, my voice slicing through the quiet. Let us talk about your pet project, Senator. The New Horizons initiative. Bradley flinched. His head snapped up, his eyes wide and alert. He knew exactly what was in that file. He knew because he had buried it under 3 layers of shell companies and non-disclosure agreements. It sounds lovely, does not it, Dad? I said, turning my gaze to Otis. New Horizons. It sounds like hope. It sounds like progress. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing a man of God should support. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded architectural rendering. I smoothed it out on the table next to the bottle of whiskey. It showed a gleaming glass tower soaring into the sky, surrounded by manicured gardens and high-end retail stores. This is the future of Cedar Grove, I said, pointing to the image. Chantel frowned, leaning in to look. That looks beautiful, she said, her voice uncertain. It looks expensive. It is expensive, I agreed. Condominiums starting at $2 million, a private gym, a concierge service, a dog park with heated pavement. But wait, Beatrice interrupted, her brow furrowed in confusion. Cedar Grove. That is where your Aunt May lives. That is where the historic community center is. That is where half the congregation lives. Exactly. Mother, I said, my eyes never leaving Bradley's face. And in this rendering, Aunt May House is a parking garage. The community center is a Starbucks. And the congregation is gone. I looked at Bradley. You filed the rezoning permits 3 weeks ago under a holding company called Urban Renewal Partners. You are not revitalizing the neighborhood, Senator. You are erasing it. You are evicting 300 families, most of them elderly, most of them on fixed incomes. You are taking their homes, their history, and their dignity, and you are paving over it so your donors can have a view of the river without seeing the poor people who used to live there. Bradley opened his mouth to argue, to spin the narrative, but I cut him off. Do not insult me with talking points, Bradley. I saw the eviction notices you have drafted. They are sitting on a server in your campaign manager office, waiting for the day after the election. The table was silent. Beatrice looked horrified, her hand covering her mouth. Chantel looked confused, trying to reconcile the image of her hero with the reality of his greed. But the worst part is not the greed, I said, my voice dropping an octave. It is not the gentrification. It is the betrayal. I turned slowly to face my father. Otis was staring at the tablecloth, his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were white. He looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and hidden the pieces. "Tell them, Dad," I said softly. "Tell them you did not know." Otis did not speak. A bead of sweat rolled down his nose and dripped onto his plate. "Tell them you did not sign the letter of support for the zoning commission," I pressed. "Tell them you did not stand in the pulpit last Sunday and preach about the blessings of change while you had a check for $500,000 sitting in your safe, a consulting fee for facilitating community outreach." Beatrice gasped. She grabbed Otis' arm, shaking him. "Otis, tell her she is lying. Tell her you would never do that. You promised the deacons you were fighting to save the grove. You told Aunt May she was safe." Otis finally looked up. His eyes were wet and red. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pleading. "It was going to happen anyway," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The developers have the city council. They have the zoning board. I could not stop it. I just tried to get the best deal for the church. I tried to ensure we had a seat at the table." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You do not have a seat at the table, Dad," I said. "You are on the menu." Bradley Thorne stopped looking like a cornered animal and started looking like a cornered snake. He realized that silence would not save him. If he was going down, he was going to take the weak link with him. He straightened his tie and let out a short, incredulous laugh that sounded like dry leaves being crushed. He pointed a finger directly at my father. "Do not look at me like I am the devil incarnate," Jasmine Bradley spat, his voice rising. "I am a businessman. I see an opportunity, I take it. But your father, the holy man, the shepherd of the flock, he is the one who opened the gate." "Senator, please." Otis begged, his voice a wet rasp. "We had an agreement. The agreement is void." "Otis," Bradley snarled, "she knows everything. So let us stop pretending. Tell your wife, tell your daughter, tell them about the consulting fee." Beatrice looked between them, her eyes darting back and forth like a trapped bird. "What consulting fee?" she whispered. "Otis, what is he talking about?" I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Yes, Dad," I said. "Tell Mom about the $500,000 that hit your private offshore account the day after you preached that sermon about accepting change." $500,000, Bradley emphasized the number, savoring the destruction. "That was the price of his conscience, Beatrice. I did not force him. I did not threaten him. I simply wrote a check. And your husband, the man who claims to speak for God, sold out 300 families for the price of a mid-range yacht and a membership at this club." The sound Beatrice made was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. It was the sound of a worldview fracturing. She grabbed the lapels of Otis' dinner jacket, shaking him violently. "Tell me he is lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Tell me you did not sell out Aunt May. Tell me you did not take blood money to evict our own people." Otis tried to pull away, but he was weak with shame. "It was for the family, B," he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I wanted to secure our future. I wanted to leave a legacy. The church is dying. The neighborhood is dying. I just wanted to get something out of it before it all crumbled." "You are the one crumbling it," Beatrice cried, pushing him away with such force that he stumbled back into his chair. She looked at him as if he were a stranger. The man she had stood beside for 40 years, the man she had defended against every critic, the man she had believed was chosen by God, was nothing more than a cheap grifter in a pulpit. The pedestal broke. The image of the great Pastor Williams dissolved into dust, leaving behind only a greedy old man who had traded his flock for silver. The room felt smaller, tighter. The air was sucked out of the space by the magnitude of his betrayal. I watched them coldly. "There it is," I said softly. "The sanctity of the Williams family, sold to the highest bidder." The sound of Beatrice's palm connecting with Otis's cheek was louder than the gunshot of a starting pistol. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings, causing the string quartet in the corner to miss a beat and trail off into silence. My mother had spent 40 years playing the role of the submissive, supportive wife, standing 2 steps behind her husband and nodding at his sermons. But in that moment, the years of repression exploded. She did not just slap him, she tried to erase him. "You liar!" she screamed, her voice shredding the sophisticated atmosphere of the ballroom. "You hypocrite! You stood in front of the congregation and told them to pray for salvation while you were selling the ground out from under their feet. How could you? How could you take that money?" Otis stumbled back, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock. He had never been struck in his life, certainly not by his wife, and certainly not in front of the city's elite. He opened his mouth to regain control, to use his pulpit voice to silence her, but Beatrice was beyond reasoning. She lunged at him again, her perfectly manicured nails aiming for his eyes. "I defended you," she shrieked. "I told everyone you were a man of God. You made me a liar. You made me a thief." That was when Chantel moved. She did not move to protect her father out of love. She moved because Otis was her bank account. He was the one who paid the lease on her car and the rent on her apartment. If Otis went down, if he was exposed as a fraud, her lifestyle would evaporate. She saw her safety net being attacked, and she reacted like a feral animal protecting its meal. Chantel threw herself between them, shoving our mother hard in the chest. "Get off him!" she yelled, her face twisted and ugly. "Leave him alone. You are crazy. You are ruining everything." Beatrice was not expecting the attack. She stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the thick carpet. Her arms flailed, looking for purchase, but found only air. She crashed into a passing waiter, sending a tray of crystal flutes shattering to the floor. The sound of breaking glass was the final bell signaling the end of civility. Beatrice hit the ground hard, her expensive gown tangled around her legs. She looked up at her favorite daughter, the golden child she had coddled and spoiled, with an expression of absolute betrayal. Chantel stood over her chest, heaving hands curled into fists, not an ounce of remorse in her eyes. "He did it for us, Mom!" Chantel screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "He did it so we could have this life. So stop being so self-righteous and get up. You are embarrassing me." The ballroom erupted. The polite murmurs were replaced by a roar of shock and excitement. This was better than politics. This was a blood sport. I saw the phones come out first, one by one, then in a wave. Hundreds of glowing screens rose in the darkness, creating a sea of digital eyes recording every second of the Williams family implosion. Flashes popped like strobe lights, blinding and relentless. I sat still amidst the chaos, my whiskey glass untouched. I watched my mother lying in broken glass. I watched my sister standing over her like a tyrant. I watched my father cowering and holding his face. They had wanted to be the center of attention. They had wanted to be the most talked about family in the city. Well, they had finally succeeded. By tomorrow morning, this brawl would be trending on every social media platform in the country. The veneer was gone. The world could finally see the rot. The ballroom was a cacophony of gasps and camera shutters, but I did not let the chaos breathe. I stood up, my movement slow and deliberate, drawing the eye like a conductor raising a baton. The noise dipped slightly, the crowd sensing the shift. They knew the main act was not over. "Chantel," I said, my voice slicing through the din like a razor. "Look at me." My sister turned, her chest still heaving from shoving our mother. Her eyes were wild, feral, but she looked. She had to. I held the power now. "You think you are protecting your future?" I continued, gesturing to the man cowering behind her. "You think if you save him, if you stand by him, he will take care of you. But you are not his partner, Chantel. You are his shield, and you are about to be his scapegoat." Chantel frowned, confusion warring with her rage. "What are you talking about?" "Bradley loves me. He invested in my future. He bought me the boutique." "Ah, yes. The boutique. Bella Chic. Prime real estate in Georgetown. High-end inventory. And curiously almost zero foot traffic." Bradley made a strangled noise, trying to interrupt, but I raised my voice slightly, silencing him effortlessly. "Tell me, Chantel, Have you ever wondered why your boutique turns a profit of exactly $9,000 every single week, regardless of sales? Have you ever wondered why you have so many cash transactions from anonymous buyers who never seem to pick up their merchandise? Chantel blinked, her brow furrowing. Bradley said those were private clients. He said they value discretion. He said business was booming because of his connections. I laughed, a dark, humorless sound. Oh, business is booming, all right. But not in fashion. Chantel, do you know what structuring is? It is a method of breaking down large sums of illicit cash into smaller deposits to avoid federal reporting requirements. Anything over $10,000 gets flagged. But 9,000 slips right under the radar. I walked around the table, closing the distance between us. Bradley did not open that store because he believed in your dream of being a fashion mogul. He opened it because he needed a laundry machine. He needed a place to clean the bribe money from the construction contracts. And he put it all in your name. Chantel looked at Bradley, her expression crumbling from defiance to horror. Is that true? She whispered. Is that why you insisted I sign all the incorporation papers? Is that why you handle the accounting yourself? Bradley refused to meet her eyes. He was staring at the floor, his face gray. It was an investment, he muttered weakly. A business opportunity. It was a setup, I corrected him brutally. He set you up, Chantel. He made you the sole proprietor. He made you the liable party. When the IRS audits that store, and they will audit it tomorrow, they are not going to look for Senator Thorne. His name is not on a single document. They are going to look for Chantel Williams. You are not just his girlfriend. You are his fall guy. You are the one who is going to federal prison for money laundering, while he claims he was just a supportive boyfriend who did not know the details of your business. Chantel took a step back, her hands trembling as they covered her mouth. The reality of her situation crashed down on her, suffocating and absolute. She looked at the boutique she was so proud of, the symbol of her success, and saw it for what it truly was. A cage. He told me it was love. She choked out the words, barely audible. He told me he wanted to give me the world. He gave you a prison sentence, I said coldly. And you signed for it. Let me explain how the federal justice system works, Chantel, because you are going to need a crash course very soon. The FBI follows the paper trail. They follow the signatures. And when they open the books for Bella Schick, they are not going to find Senator Thorne's name anywhere. They are going to find yours. You are the registered agent. You are the CEO. You are the one who physically deposited the cash into the bank account every Friday afternoon. I paused, letting the weight of the law settle on her shoulders. Bradley has plausible deniability. He will say he was just a supportive boyfriend who had no idea his girlfriend was running a criminal enterprise. He will say he is shocked and heartbroken by your betrayal. He will testify against you to cut a deal for himself. He has already prepared the statement, Chantel. I saw the draft in his cloud drive. It says he is devastated to learn that the woman he loved was abusing his connections to launder money. Chantel turned slowly toward the man she had planned to marry. She looked like a sleepwalker waking up in the middle of a highway. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for any sign of denial, any hint of the hero she thought she knew. Bradley, she whispered, her voice cracking. Tell her she is crazy. She is. Tell her you would never do that to me. You said we were partners. You said you were building a future for us. Bradley did not answer. He did not reach for her hand. He did not offer a comforting lie. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes fixed on a spot on the wall somewhere over her left shoulder. He looked bored. He looked like a man who was already calculating his next move, and she was no longer part of the equation. You knew, Chantel said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a dawning horrific realization. You knew all along. That is why you never let me hire an accountant. That is why you insisted I sign the checks personally. You were not teaching me business. You were building a paper trail that led straight to me. Bradley sighed, a sound of impatience. Chantel, please, do not be dramatic. We can get you a lawyer. We can handle this. She screamed the word tearing out of her throat. There is no we, is there? There is just me going to jail and you going to the governor's mansion. You used me. You used my family. You used my love to protect your own skin. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The man she worshipped was not her savior. He was her executioner. And he had been smiling the entire time he tightened the noose. Something inside Chantel snapped. The veneer of the perfect political wife, the poised choir girl, the golden child, it all disintegrated in a flash of white-hot rage. She let out a feral shriek that silenced the entire ballroom. She did not slap him. She did not push him. She launched herself at him like a wild animal. Her hands' claws now went for his face. She raked her fingernails down his cheeks, drawing lines of bright red blood across his perfect politician's tan. She grabbed his hair, yanking his head back, screaming obscenities that would have made Otis faint if he was not already in shock. "You monster!" she shrieked, tearing at his expensive suit jacket. "You ruined my life. I will kill you. I will kill you." Bradley stumbled back his chair, tipping over with a crash. He put his hands up, trying to fend her off, but Chantel was fueled by the adrenaline of a woman who had lost everything. She was a whirlwind of chiffon and fury, tearing down the idol she had built with her own hands. "Get off me, you lunatic!" Bradley roared, his voice losing all semblance of senatorial polish. He planted his hands on Chantel's shoulders and shoved with all the strength of a desperate man. Chantel flew backward, her heels catching on the plush carpet. She crashed into the edge of the head table, taking a heavy crystal vase filled with white roses down with her. Water and petals showered over her expensive gown as she hit the floor with a bone-jarring thud. She gasped. The wind knocked out of her, lying amidst the wreckage of the floral arrangement, looking like a broken doll. The sound of her body hitting the floor seemed to snap something in Otis Williams. For the last hour he had stood by and watched his dignity be stripped away, layer by layer. He had watched his political alliances crumble. He had watched his financial crimes be exposed. But watching the man he had idolized physically assault his golden child was the final straw. The pastor vanished. The man remained. "You son of a bitch!" Otis bellowed, his voice cracking. He lunged across the space between them, moving faster than a man his age should be able to move. He did not lead with a prayer. He led with a right hook. Otis' fist connected clumsily with Bradley's jaw. It was not a clean hit, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of suppressed rage and humiliation. Bradley stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. He tripped over the leg of a chair and went down hard, crashing into a dessert cart. A 3-tier chocolate cake slid off its pedestal and landed squarely on the senator's chest, exploding in a cloud of frosting and crumbs. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Beatrice was screaming, clutching her pearls, her voice piercing the air. "Stop it! Stop it! Someone help them!" But no one moved to help. The guests were too busy recording. This was not just a fight. It was the total disintegration of the social order. Two of the most powerful men in the state were rolling on the floor, grappling like drunks in a parking lot. Bradley scrambled to his feet, wiping chocolate from his eyes. He swung back wildly, catching Otis in the stomach. Otis doubled over, wheezing, but he grabbed Bradley's lapels and pulled him down again. They tore at each other, ripping expensive fabric and trading clumsy blows. It was pathetic. It was ugly. It was the raw, unfiltered truth of who they were when the money and the titles were stripped away. Security finally moved in. Marcus waded into the fray, his movements efficient and bored. He grabbed Bradley by the back of his frosting-covered collar and Otis by his belt, hauling them apart with the ease of a man separating fighting toddlers. "That is enough," Marcus barked, holding them at arm length. Both men were panting, bleeding, and utterly disgraced. I sat perfectly still amidst the pandemonium. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I reached for the bottle of whiskey and poured another finger of amber liquid into my glass. I swirled it, watching the light catch the alcohol. I took a slow, satisfied sip, the burn pleasant against the chaos unfolding before me. I watched my father wiping blood from his lip. I watched the senator checking his teeth. I watched my sister sobbing in a puddle of rose water. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The play was almost over, but I had one more act to deliver. The fight was devolving into a farce. Otis was wheezing, clutching his side where Bradley had kicked him. Bradley was trying to wipe chocolate frosting off his face with a silk handkerchief, his dignity lying in ruins on the carpet. Chantel was still sobbing hysterically on the floor, a wet heap of chiffon and self-pity. The guests were murmuring, the sound rising like a tide. The cameras were still flashing. It was a circus, and I was tired of watching the clowns. I picked up my heavy crystal whiskey glass. I did not raise it to my lips. Instead, I brought it down hard on the table. The sound was not a polite clink. It was a gunshot crack of glass against wood, loud enough to make everyone in the room jump. The base of the glass shattered, sending shards flying across the tablecloth. Whiskey splashed onto the white linen, spreading like a dark stain. Enough. The word was not a scream, it was a command. It was the voice I used when I walked into boardrooms full of panicked executives and told them their company was bleeding out. It was the voice that made grown men stop arguing and start listening. The effect was instantaneous. Otis froze mid-breath, his hand still clutching his ribs. Bradley stopped wiping his face, his eyes snapping to mine. Chantel choked back a sob, staring up at me from the floor. Even the guests fell silent, the murmuring cut off as if someone had pulled the plug. "Sit down," I said. My voice was low, calm, and utterly terrifying. "All of you, now." I did not have to shout. I did not have to threaten. I simply stood up. I rose from my chair, slowly smoothing the front of my dress. I looked down at them from the raised platform like a judge looking down from the bench. I radiated a cold, focused power that filled the room. Otis hesitated for a fraction of a second, his old instinct to assert dominance flickering in his eyes. But then he looked at my face. He saw something there he had never seen before. He saw the predator that had been hiding in plain sight. He saw the woman who held his life in her hands. He swallowed hard and sank back into his chair, his movements jerky and defeated. Bradley did not even hesitate. He scrambled back to his seat, his eyes wide and fearful. He looked like a schoolboy caught cheating on a test, terrified of the principal. He sat on the edge of his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, trying to make himself small. "Get up, Chantel," I ordered, not looking at her. "Sit in your chair." My sister dragged herself up from the floor, her dress stained and torn. She wiped her face, leaving streaks of mascara across her cheeks. She did not argue. She did not throw a tantrum. She simply obeyed, shuffling to her seat and collapsing into it, her eyes fixed on the table. They sat there, a row of broken people waiting for my judgment. The pastor, the senator, the golden child. They were silent, obedient, and terrified. I looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of my authority. I was not the secretary. I was not the disappointment. I was the one holding the gavel. Bradley dabbed at the cut on his lip with the ruined silk handkerchief. He looked at the smear of bright red blood against the white fabric, and then he looked at me. The panic that had fueled his fistfight with my father was gone. In its place was the cold, calculating stare of a man who had made a career out of surviving scandals. He was a politician after all. He knew that when violence failed and intimidation failed, there was always one card left to play: bribery. He adjusted his torn jacket, sitting up straighter in his chair. He took a deep breath, composing himself. He looked at me not as a future sister-in-law, and not as an enemy, but as a peer. He recognized the look in my eyes. He realized finally that I was not just a secretary with a grudge. I was a professional. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and steady, the chaos of the room fading into the background. "Let us stop playing games." "You are not just a consultant, are you? You are a cleaner. I have heard the rumors about the woman the White House calls when they need a problem to vanish. I just never put the pieces together until now." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the messy tablecloth, ignoring the spilled wine and broken glass. "You are the best there is," he continued, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You can fix this. You can make those photos disappear. You can bury the audit. You can make the IRS look the other way. I know you can. You have done it for worse men than me. I watched him, my face impassive. I waited. $5 million, Bradley said, the number hanging in the air like a physical object. 5 million. Wired to any account you want. Bitcoin, Swiss francs, gold bars. I do not care. You help me clean this up. You help me spin this night as a misunderstanding, and the money is yours. The reaction from my family was immediate and pathetic. The moment the number left his lips, the tension in Otis' shoulders evaporated. He forgot about the punch to his gut. He forgot about the betrayal of the congregation. He forgot about the eviction notices. He heard $5 million and he saw a salvation for his greed. He looked at me, his eyes wide and shining with a desperate, hungry hope. He was practically begging me with his gaze to take the deal. Chantel stopped sniffling. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, looking from Bradley to me. Her avarice was a reflex. She saw the boutique being saved. She saw the lifestyle continuing. She was willing to forgive the cheating, the lying, and the assault for a cut of that $5 million. They were leaning toward me like flowers turning toward the sun, waiting for me to say yes, so they could go back to their comfortable, corrupt lives. The silence stretched out. I looked at Bradley's desperate face. I looked at my father's greedy eyes. I looked at my sister's hopeful expression. It was nauseating. They thought I was one of them. They thought everything I had done tonight was just a negotiation tactic. They thought I was holding out for a better price. I smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. I picked up the bottle of whiskey, pouring the last few drops into my glass. $5 million, I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue. Bradley nodded eagerly. Yes, 5 million. It is a fortune, Jasmine. Think of what you could do. I took a sip of the whiskey, letting the silence crush them for one more second. You have misunderstood the situation, Senator, I said softly. You think this is a shakedown. You think I want your blood money. But you are forgetting who I am. I leaned in close, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a knife against his throat. $5 million is pocket change, Bradley. My price is much higher than that. And unfortunately for you, it is not something you can pay with a bank transfer. I looked at Bradley, waiting for my answer with that smug, expectant look on his face. He truly believed he had won. He believed that underneath the tailored dress and the cold demeanor, I was just like him. He thought I was for sale. He thought my morality was just a negotiating tactic to drive up the price. Beside him, my father and sister were practically holding their breath, their eyes shining with the reflection of the money they thought was coming their way. They were already spending it in their heads. They were already planning the renovations and the vacations and the new cars. I reached out, but not for his hand. I reached for the decanter of Cabernet Sauvignon that had been sitting near the center of the table. It was heavy, cool crystal filled with a dark, blood-red vintage. I poured a glass slowly, the liquid glugging softly in the silence. Bradley smiled. He thought I was pouring a celebratory drink. He thought we were about to toast to our new partnership. He picked up his own glass, ready to clink it against mine, ready to seal the deal that would save his skin. I stood up, holding the glass by the stem. I looked at the dark liquid swirling against the crystal. Then, with a flick of my wrist, I emptied the entire contents of the glass directly into his face. The wine hit him with a splash that sounded shockingly loud. It drenched his face, blinding him for a moment, before cascading down onto his pristine white dinner jacket. The expensive fabric soaked up the red liquid instantly. It spread across his chest like a blooming wound. It looked like he had been shot at close range. Bradley sputtered, gasping and wiping at his eyes, the wine dripping from his nose and chin, staining his shirt pink. Otis gasped. Chantel shrieked. But I did not lower my hand. You are confused, Senator, I said, my voice ice cold. You think everyone operates in your currency. You think $5 million is a lot of money. To a person with no soul, perhaps it is. But you cannot buy me, Bradley. I am not a product. I am a reckoning. I set the empty glass down on the table. My price is justice. I continued staring down at him as he dabbed frantically at his ruined suit. My price is the dignity of the people you stole from. My price is seeing the look on your face when you realize you are not above the law. I do not sell myself to the devil, Bradley. I exorcise him. He looked up at me, his eyes red and stinging from the alcohol, his face a mask of pure hate. You are making a mistake, he hissed. You have no idea what you are doing. I can destroy you. If you walk away from this deal, I will ruin you. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, light and free. You are trying to negotiate a hostage situation when the hostages have already been released, I said, checking my watch casually. You see, I did not come here to make a deal. I came here to watch the show. I leaned in closer so he could hear every syllable. I uploaded the files 30 minutes ago, Bradley. When I went to the ladies' room before dinner, I pressed send. The FBI has the encrypted ledger. The IRS has the shell company records. The state attorney general has the audio recordings. And the press has the photos of your little boat trip. The color drained from his face so fast it was visible beneath the wine stains. He looked at his watch, then at the door, then back at me with the dawn of absolute terror. It is over, I whispered. You are not a senator anymore. You are a suspect. Bradley sat there dripping with red wine, looking like a caricature of a disgraced king. He was still trying to process the words I had just spoken. He was trying to calculate if I was bluffing, if there was a way to spin this, if he could make a call to a judge he owned and make it all go away. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to threaten me again, or to offer me 10 million instead of 5. But the words never left his lips. The heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom did not just open. They exploded inward with a violence that shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. It sounded like a thunderclap trapped inside a glass jar. The orchestra stopped playing instantly, the bow of the cellist screeching across the strings in a discordant wail. The polite murmur of conversation died in a single heartbeat, replaced by a vacuum of stunned silence. Then came the shout. It was not a request. It was a wall of sound that hit the guests with physical force. FBI. Federal agents. Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them. They poured into the room like a dark blue tide. 24 agents in tactical gear with yellow letters emblazoned on their chest plates and backs. They moved with the terrifying synchronized efficiency of a wolf pack. They did not look at the expensive flower arrangements. They did not care about the net worth of the people sitting at the tables. They had weapons drawn, held low and ready, scanning the room for threats. The ballroom erupted into chaos. It was a panic of the privileged. Women in designer gowns screamed and dropped to the floor, clutching their diamond necklaces as if the agents were robbers. Men in tuxedos who were used to giving orders raised their shaking hands in the air, their faces pale with the sudden realization that their money could not protect them from this. Chairs were knocked over, glasses shattered. The illusion of safety, the bubble of the elite, was popped by the heavy boots of federal law enforcement stomping across the plush carpet. I watched from the head table as the lead team moved. They did not stop to check the guests. They had a specific target. They marched down the center aisle, cutting a path through the sea of frightened donors heading straight for the riser. Straight for us. Bradley stood up slowly. He looked small. The arrogance that had defined him, the swagger of a man who thought he owned the state, was gone. He looked at the approaching agents, and he knew. He saw the lead agent, a tall woman with a grim expression, and he recognized the end of the road. He did not run. There was nowhere to run. He simply held his hands out in front of him, wrists together, in a gesture of absolute defeat. Behind the agents came the second wave, the press. The reporters who had been bored waiting outside for a soundbite suddenly realized they were witnessing the story of the decade. They surged against the perimeter. The agents had set up their cameras raised like weapons. The room turned white. The flashes went off in a blinding staccato rhythm, a strobe light of public humiliation. Pop, pop, pop. The light captured every detail in high definition. The wine-stained white jacket, the bruises on his face from the fight with Otis, the handcuffs clicking around the wrists of a United States senator. It was a frenzy. Every shutter click was a headline. Every flash was a legacy being destroyed. I sat perfectly still in the center of the storm, sipping my whiskey, watching the world finally see the truth. The lead FBI agent did not ask for the senator's permission to approach. She did not salute him. She did not care about his title or his polling numbers. She moved with the efficient brutality of someone who had taken down drug lords and terrorists, and to her Bradley Thorne was just another criminal in a fancy suit. She grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around with enough force to make his head snap back. "Get your hands off me!" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal of indignation. "Do you know who I am? I am a United States Senator. I have immunity. This is a violation of my rights." The agent did not argue. She did not debate constitutional law. She simply kicked his legs out from under him. Bradley hit the ground hard. His face, the same face that smiled from billboards and campaign ads, smashed into the carpet. The sound of his chin hitting the floor was a dull, heavy thud that made the nearby guests flinch. The wine-soaked white dinner jacket smeared against the rug, creating a gruesome pink stain that looked like a crime scene. He tried to push himself up, but a knee was pressed firmly into the small of his back, pinning him down like an insect. His arms were wrenched behind him. The metal handcuffs clicked shut, with a sound that was louder than the screaming crowd. Click, click. The sound of a career ending. The sound of a life over. Bradley Thorne, the man who claimed to be the future of the state, dissolved. The mask fell away completely, leaving only a terrified, desperate coward. He realized in that split second that his connections could not save him. He realized he was going to prison. And like a rat trapped in a corner, he started to bite. "It wasn't me," he howled into the carpet, his voice muffled, but audible enough for the cameras to pick up every word. "I was set up. It was them. It was the family." He twisted his neck, trying to point his chin toward the table where my parents and sister sat, frozen in horror. "Check the accounts," he screamed, spitting saliva and carpet fibers. "It is Otis Williams. He is the mastermind. He took the bribes. He set up the shell companies. And the girl, Chantel. She runs the laundering operation. It is her store. Her name is on the papers. I am innocent. They used me. They tricked me. I did not know anything." Otis gasped, clutching his chest as if he had been shot. He watched the man he had practically worshipped, the man he had sold his soul to protect, throw him to the wolves without a second thought. Chantel covered her ears, shaking her head violently, sobbing as the man she loved tried to send her to prison to save his own skin. The agents hauled Bradley to his feet. He could not stand. His legs had turned to jelly, his knees buckling under the weight of his fear. He did not walk out of that ballroom with his head held high. He did not wave to his supporters. 2 agents grabbed him by the arms and dragged him. The toes of his expensive Italian leather shoes scraped uselessly across the floor, leaving scuff marks on the parquet. He was still screaming as they hauled him toward the exit. He was still shouting accusations, still begging for a deal, still blaming everyone but himself. The photographers swarmed him, the flashes popping in a blinding white storm, illuminating his tear-streaked face and his ruined suit. He looked pathetic. He looked small. He was no longer a lion. He was just a dog being taken to the pound, and the whole world was watching him whimper. The show was not over yet. Bradley was gone, dragged out like a sack of garbage, but the agents remained. They turned their attention back to the head table, where the remnants of the Williams dynasty sat amid spilled wine and shattered glass. The silence in the room was heavy and expectant. The guests knew that corruption rarely happened in a vacuum, and they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped squarely on Chantel. A female agent with a face like stone stepped up to my sister. Chantel was wiping her nose with a cocktail napkin, still trying to play the role of the victim, the heartbroken fiancé who had been duped by a bad man. She looked up at the agent expecting sympathy. She expected to be offered a blanket and a glass of water. Chantel Williams, the agent said, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Chantel blinked, her brain refusing to process the words. Arrest. That was something that happened to other people. That was something that happened to the poor people in her father's congregation, not to the future First Lady of the state. What? She squeaked, her voice high and thin. No, you are making a mistake. I am the victim here. He used me. You are the sole proprietor of the business used to launder the funds, the agent said impassively, pulling a pair of metal cuffs from her belt. We have your signature on the deposit slips. We have the tax returns you filed. Turn around. Ms. Williams, now. The reality hit her like a physical blow. Chantel let out a wail that sounded less like a human cry and more like a wounded animal. She scrambled backward, her chair screeching against the floor, but there was nowhere to go. The agent grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back with practiced ease. The click of the handcuffs was the final nail in the coffin of her vanity. Chantel began to hyperventilate. The mascara was running down her face in black rivers, turning her into a grotesque mask of tragedy. She looked around wildly, searching for a savior. Her eyes landed on me. Jasmine, she screamed, pulling against the restraints. Jasmine, help me. Tell them I did not know. I am your sister. You cannot let them take me to jail. Please, Jasmine. I am sorry. I am so sorry for everything. Just make it stop. I watched her writhing in the grip of the federal agent. 10 minutes ago, I was a jealous failure. 10 minutes ago, I was a secretary who bought fake jewelry. Now suddenly I was her sister. Now that she was facing the consequences of her greed, she wanted to claim the bond she had spent years trying to sever. I did not move. I did not speak. I simply looked at her with the same cool detachment I would use to look at a stranger on the street. While Chantel was being dragged away, screaming, 2 other agents approached my father. Otis tried to stand up to summon some shred of his pastoral authority, but his legs were shaking too hard. Pastor Williams, the lead agent, said, "We need you to come with us to the station. We have some questions regarding a $500,000 wire transfer from the Urban Renewal Fund to your personal account." Otis looked at the agents, then at the cameras flashing in the distance. He realized there was no sermon that could talk his way out of this. He slumped, his shoulders broken and defeated, allowing them to guide him away by the elbow like a confused old man. That left Beatrice. My mother looked at her husband being detained. She looked at her golden child in handcuffs. She looked at the flashing cameras capturing the total destruction of her social standing. It was too much for her vanity to bear. She did the only thing she knew how to do to escape a scene she could not control. She rolled her eyes back in her head, let out a soft theatrical moan, and collapsed onto the carpet in a dead faint. It was a perfect performance, but nobody rushed to help her. They were all too busy watching the credits roll on the Williams family tragedy. The ballroom was finally quieting down. The screams of my sister and the protests of the senator were fading as the heavy doors swallowed them whole, leaving behind a room full of stunned socialites and flashing cameras. The air felt lighter. It was the feeling of a storm passing, leaving the atmosphere scrubbed clean. I did not look at the exit. My work was done. The special agent in charge. The man who had orchestrated the raid walked through the debris of the fallen dynasty. He was a man of few words, a veteran who had seen everything, but as he approached my table, his expression softened. He did not look at me with the pity usually reserved for the relatives of criminals. He looked at me with the deference one soldier shows another after a successful mission. He stepped over the puddle of spilled wine and the shattered remains of the flower arrangement. He stopped in front of me and extended his hand. It was a firm, professional gesture. "Ms. Williams," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that silenced the few people still whispering near us. "I wanted to thank you personally. We have been trying to build a case against Senator Thorne for 2 years. We had pieces, but we never had the full picture. The dossier you uploaded was flawless. He shook my hand and the grip was solid. It was an acknowledgement of peers. The forensic accounting was particularly impressive, he continued. The way you traced the shell companies through the Cyprus banks to the Cayman Islands. I have agents with 20 years of experience who could not have unraveled that knot so quickly. You handed us everything on a silver platter. The indictments are already being filed. Without you, he would have walked away again. I felt the eyes of the room on us. The wealthy donors, the business rivals, the gossip columnists. They were watching the head of the FBI treat the quiet secretary like a high-ranking asset. They saw the shift. They realized I was not the poor, unfortunate daughter sitting on the sidelines. I was the architect of the evening. I was not the victim of my family's cruelty. I was the hunter who had patiently waited in the long grass for the right moment to strike. Otis, who was being led away by a junior agent near the door, looked back one last time. He saw the handshake. He saw the respect. And in that moment, the last of his delusions shattered. He realized that while he was playing petty church politics, I was operating on a level he could not even comprehend. He saw the monster he had created, and he saw that I had eaten them all alive. I released the agent's hand and smoothed the napkin on my lap. I did not smile. I did not gloat. This was not a celebration. It was a transaction. You are welcome, agent. I said, my voice cool and steady. Just make sure the charges stick. I would hate to have to do this again. He nodded once, a sharp military motion. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me alone at the head of the table. The queen sitting on her throne, surrounded by the ruins of her enemies, perfectly content in the silence. The silence that followed the raid was absolute. The FBI agents had cleared the room of the criminals, dragging my screaming sister and my broken father out into the night. The photographers had chased the chaos, leaving the ballroom eerily empty, save for the stunned guests whispering in the corners, and the wreckage at the head table. And my mother. Beatrice stopped pretending to be unconscious the moment the handcuffs clicked on her husband. She realized that playing dead would not save her now. She sat up amidst the spilled rosewater and broken glass, her perfectly coiffed hair a ruin, her expensive gowns stained with wine and frosting. She looked around the empty space where her family used to be, where her power used to be, and then she looked at me. She did not stand up with dignity. She did not straighten her spine and walk away. She scrambled toward me on her hands and knees, ruining her stockings on the carpet. It was a pathetic display. The woman who had spent my entire life looking down her nose at me, criticizing my hair, my clothes, and my career, was now literally at my feet. She grabbed the hem of my dress, her hands trembling, clutching the fabric as if it were a lifeline. Jasmine, baby, she wept, her voice a broken rasp that grated against my ears. You have to stop this. You have to fix this. You heard what that man said. You are powerful. You know people. You can make a call. Please, baby. That is your sister. That is your father. We are your blood. I looked down at her. I looked at the tears cutting tracks through her heavy makeup. I searched for any sign of genuine love, any hint that she saw me as a daughter and not just a resource. But all I saw was fear. She was not crying for me. She was crying because her ATM was gone. She was crying because her social standing was dead. She was crying because she was going to have to face the world as the wife of a fraud. I am sorry. Okay? She blubbered, clutching my dress tighter, pulling at the silk. I am sorry we were hard on you. We just wanted you to be tough. We wanted you to be strong. And look at you. You are strong. You are a fixer. That is what you do. You fix things. So fix us, Jasmine. Save your family. Be the good daughter I know you are. I reached down and peeled her fingers off my dress one by one. I did not do it roughly, but I did it with a finality that made her freeze. I stood up and took a step back, putting distance between us. I smoothed the fabric where her desperation had wrinkled it. "You are right, Mother," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the hollow room. "I am a fixer. I specialize in crisis management. Companies hire me when they are rotting from the inside out, when the corruption is so deep, it threatens to kill the whole host." I looked at her, cowering on the floor, looking small and old and pathetic. "And the first rule of crisis management is triage." I continued, cold and clinical. "When a limb is gangrenous, you do not try to save it with a band-aid. You do not talk to it. You do not pray over it. You cut it off." Beatrice gasped, her mouth falling open. She finally understood. "There was no salvation coming. You and Dad and Chantel, you are not my family. You are a tumor. I have spent 30 years letting you drain the life out of me, letting you poison my happiness. But tonight was not an accident. It was surgery. And as of this moment, I am finally cancer-free." I turned my back on her for the last time, leaving her kneeling in the wreckage of her own making, and walked toward the exit without looking back. I stopped halfway to the double doors, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. There was one last loose end to tie up, one final piece of the puzzle that I needed to place before I walked out of their lives forever. I reached into my clutch one last time. It was almost empty now, the evidence files gone, the phone silent. There was just a single folded document left. I turned back to face my mother. Beatrice was still on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of the evening, trying to wipe the frosting and wine from her dress with a ruined napkin. She looked up at me warily, not sure if I was going to offer her a hand or another insult. I walked back slowly and held out the paper. I did not hand it to her. I held it just out of reach, forcing her to strain her eyes to read the bold text at the top. "Do you recognize this address, Mother?" I asked, my voice conversational and light. Beatrice squinted, her eyes red and puffy. "Of course I do," she sniffed. "That is the manor. That is our home. Why do you have a document about our house?" I folded the paper back up and tapped it against my chin thoughtfully. "Because it is not your house anymore," I said simply. Beatrice froze. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "We have lived there for 20 years. It is paid off." "It was paid off," I corrected her. "Until 3 months ago. You see, Dad was so confident in Bradley's victory, so sure that the kickbacks from the construction deal would make him millions, that he decided to double down. He took out a second mortgage. He leveraged the entire equity of the estate to give Bradley an emergency cash injection for his campaign. He bet the farm, Mother. Literally." Beatrice let out a low moan, her hand flying to her throat. "He told me that money came from the church fund." She gasped. "He told me the house was safe." "He lied," I said. "He gambled everything on a horse that just broke its leg. And he lost. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings yesterday morning. The notice was in the mail pile he hid in his office. By noon today, the bank technically owned the roof over your head. You are homeless, Beatrice. Or at least you would be." I watched the terror seize her. For a woman like Beatrice, homelessness was not just about having nowhere to sleep. It was about the loss of status. It was about the neighbors seeing the moving trucks. It was about being ordinary. "But I have some good news," I said, allowing a small smile to touch my lips. I happened to be tracking Otis' financial blunders. When the foreclosure alert hit the system, I stepped in. I made a call to the bank. I paid off the debt in full plus the penalties. I waved the document slightly. "I bought the deed, Mother. The house belongs to me now. Every brick, every chandelier, every piece of furniture. I own it all." Beatrice slumped with relief, the color rushing back into her face. She let out a long, shuddering breath and looked at me with eyes full of sudden, renewed affection. She saw a lifeline. She saw a way to salvage her dignity. "Oh, thank God," she cried, scrambling to her feet and reaching for me again. "Oh, Jasmine, you scared me half to death. I knew you would not let us down. I knew you would step up when it mattered." She smoothed her dress, a glimmer of her old entitlement returning to her voice. "Thank you, darling. That is such a relief. We can handle the scandal with the church as long as we have the house. We can hide out there until this blows over. You are a good girl, Jasmine. I know we have had our differences, but I knew you would not put your own mother on the street. You are letting us stay right. We can keep the master bedroom, and you can take the guest suite when you visit. I watched the relief wash over my mother's face. It was instantaneous and complete. The moment she thought her physical comfort was secured, the fear evaporated. She did not care about her husband in the police car. She did not care about her daughter in handcuffs. She only cared that she still had a master suite and a zip code that commanded respect. She was already mentally rearranging the furniture, already planning how she would spin this to her bridge club. She reached out to touch my arm, her face arranging itself into a smile that was meant to be maternal, but looked more like a predator inspecting a meal. "You are a good girl, Jasmine." She purred, her voice dripping with false affection. "I always told your father you had a good heart. We can make this work. We will tell everyone you are the new owner on paper for tax purposes, of course, but nothing has to change. I will keep the garden looking lovely," and I stepped back, letting her hand drop into the empty air. I shook my head slowly, a small pitying smile on my lips. "You have misunderstood the situation completely. Mother," I said, my voice soft but unyielding as granite, "I did not buy the house to save it. And I certainly did not buy it to run a bed and breakfast for the woman who spent 30 years making me feel small." Beatrice froze, her smile faltering at the edges. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I mean that the bulldozers are scheduled for Monday morning," I said. "I already have the permits. I am leveling the estate, Beatrice. Every pillar, every marble floor, every gilded mirror. It is all coming down." She gasped, clutching her chest. "You cannot do that. That house is a landmark. It is our legacy." "It is a monument to greed," I corrected her. "And when the dust settles, I am donating the land to the city. I have already approved the architectural plans for the new construction. It will not be a mansion. It will be a transition center. A shelter for the 300 families that Dad sold out. The people from Cedar Grove who are losing their homes because of your husband is corruption. They are going to live on your land. They are going to sleep where your garden used to be. It seems only fair, doesn't it?" Beatrice stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The horror was total. I was not just taking her home. I was replacing it with the very people she looked down upon. I was turning her castle into a sanctuary for the poor. "But where will I go?" she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes again. "I have nowhere. I have no money." I checked my watch, ignoring her tears. "You have friends, Mother. You have the social circle you prioritized over your own children. I am sure one of them will take you in. Although considering you are now the wife of a disgraced felon, I imagine the invitations will be scarce." I turned to walk away, but I stopped and looked back over my shoulder one last time. "You have 24 hours, I said, my voice ringing with finality. "You can take your clothes and your personal items, leave the furniture, leave the art, leave anything of value. That belongs to the bank, and the bank belongs to me. If you are not off the property by sunset tomorrow, I will have the sheriff remove you for trespassing. And Mother, he won't be as polite as the FBI." Beatrice let out a scream that tore through the empty ballroom, a sound of pure, unadulterated despair. She fell to her knees, pounding the floor with her fists, wailing like a child who had been denied a toy. But I did not feel a thing. The cord was cut. The debt was paid. I walked through the double doors and out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of the Williams dynasty behind me in the dark. The heavy oak doors of the country club swung shut behind me, cutting off the noise of the chaos inside. The wails of my mother, the shouting of the federal agents, and the frantic clicking of the cameras all faded into a muffled hum. Silence rushed in to fill the space. It was heavy and sweet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. It smelled of damp earth and pine trees and rain on the horizon. It smelled clean. For the first time in 30 years, I did not feel the crushing weight of expectation on my shoulders. The invisible yoke that my father had placed there the day I was born was gone. The constant need to apologize for my existence, to shrink myself, so my sister could shine, to buy their love with my dignity, it had all evaporated in that ballroom. I was light. I felt like I could float off the pavement. I walked down the wide stone steps, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the marble. Click, click, click. It was not the frantic pace of a fixer rushing to put out a fire. It was the leisurely tempo of a woman who had just watched the world burn and warmed her hands by the flames. The valet was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He was a young man, usually bored and checking his phone, but tonight he stood at attention. He had seen the police cars. He had seen the FBI raid. And now he saw me walking out alone, calm and untouched. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He scrambled to the key rack, his hands fumbling slightly as he retrieved the fob for my car. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. Dozens of missed calls from Otis, hysterical texts from Chantel, voicemails from the family lawyer. I didn't open any of them. I didn't even unlock the screen. Instead, I pressed the side button and held it down until the screen went black. Then I slid the phone back into my bag. I pulled out my burner phone, the one I used for business, and dialed a single number. Sarah answered on the first ring. "It is done," I said, my voice steady. "Is it over?" she asked. "Completely," I replied. "The senator is in custody. The files are with the district attorney. The assets have been frozen. The house is secured." There was a pause on the line. "And the payment?" Sarah asked. "The client wired the funds 10 minutes ago. $2 million. It is in the holding account." I looked up at the moon hanging low and full in the sky. $2 million. It was a lot of money. It was enough to buy a new life. But I didn't want their money. I didn't want anything that touched this sordid affair. "I don't want it," I said. "What do you want me to do with it?" Sarah asked. "Transfer it," I said. "All of it. Send $2 million to the Urban Renewal Scholarship Fund. Make sure it is earmarked specifically for the students in the Cedar Grove district. Put it in the name of the Williams Family Trust. Let my father pay for their education whether he wants to or not." I could hear the smile in Sarah's voice. "Done. Anything else, boss?" "Yes," I said, watching the valet pull my car around. "Book me a flight. Where to?" "London, Paris, New York, Bali." I said the word tasting like exotic fruit on my tongue. "And make it a one-way ticket. I need to disappear for a while. I need to sit on a beach and listen to the ocean until I forget the sound of my own name." The sleek black Maybach purred to a stop at the curb. The valet opened the rear door, bowing low. I slid into the leather seat, the interior smelling of expensive conditioning and silence. It was a sanctuary. I settled back, closing my eyes for a brief moment, letting the adrenaline finally drain away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and an even deeper peace. "Where to, Ms. Williams?" the driver asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "The airport," I said. "And step on it. I have a plane to catch." The car pulled away, the tires crunching softly on the gravel driveway. As we accelerated down the long, winding road leading away from the club, I felt the urge to look back. It is a human instinct to want to see the aftermath, to look at the wreckage one last time, to see the flashing lights of the police cruisers reflecting off the windows of the place where my old life had died. But I didn't turn my head. I didn't check the side mirror. I didn't look back at the burning bridge. There was nothing behind me worth saving. There were only ghosts and greedy people, and a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. I looked forward through the windshield, at the road stretching out into the darkness illuminated by the twin beams of the headlights. The road was open, the destination was unknown, and for the first time in my life, I was the one driving. The screen faded to black, and the only sound left was the steady hum of the engine carrying me toward freedom. The most profound lesson from Jasmine's story is that shared DNA does not obligate you to endure abuse. True worth is self-determined, never defined by family validation or social status. While her family chased the illusion of power through greed and deceit, Jasmine built real power through competence and resilience. This narrative teaches us that walking away from toxic environments is not a sign of weakness, but a necessary act of survival. Ultimately, the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it is succeeding on your own terms and finding the peace to finally walk away and never look back. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. If you are ready to reclaim your dignity and write your own ending, hit that like button and subscribe because your comeback season starts now.